For over 1,000 years, people have believed that 7 core vices led to the downfall of individuals and even civilizations. These so-called deadly sins weren't just bad habits. They were seen as soul-corrupting forces that could sometimes literally drag you to hell. But here's the thing. Times change, and so do our demons. It wasn't just about overeating. It was about excess, indulgence, letting cravings control you. Back then, the warning was pretty simple. Don't let your hunger consume you. But today, we face a far more insidious form of gluttony. One that doesn't just fill our plates, but our closets, our homes, and even our minds. I'm talking about consumerism, the modern day form of gluttony. A hunger for more and more. More things, more status, more dopamine hits, and just like gluttony in the past, it's a hunger that you will never satisfy. The concept of gluttony has been around for thousands of years. Early Christian monks saw it as a spiritual sickness, an inability to control one's desires, leading to a life dominated by indulgence. It wasn't just about food, it was about losing yourself in excess. Medieval thinkers believed this vice weakened not just individuals, but led to the downfall of societies. Fast forward to today, and that same hunger has taken on a new form. With the rise of industrialization, advertising, social media, fast fashion, we've been trained to want more, spend more, and feel like we never have enough. The old warnings against overindulgence weren't erased. They were repackaged and sold back to us as lifestyle aspirations. Gluttony has evolved, and so has its grip on us. In this episode, I want to break down how consumerism has become the world's most acceptable addiction, why we're so easily trapped by it, and most importantly, how you can break free from its cycle and take back control of your life. Join me this week for episode 1 in our 7-part series, The Modern Day 7 Deadly Sins. The concept of gluttony as a sin has existed since the early days of Judaism. Originally, the idea of gluttony involved essentially waste, having excess, more than you need. And it was for very practical reasons. Food wasn't always as abundant as it is now. And when food was scarce, it was seen as a crime not only against God, but against society to be wasteful, overindulgent. In the medieval ages, gluttony transformed from being simply wasteful or excess to something more. Medieval Christians developed the idea of asceticism, which is essentially purposefully living far below your means. The idea was that any sort of excess was sinful, not just eating too much, but eating food that tasted too rich, for example, stimulating the palate with overly or elaborately prepared food was seen as a deadly sin. And I think this is where the idea of gluttony was first corrupted. This is where the possibility for gluttony to be transformed into the insidious idea of consumerism first took hold. Because when you pervert the original idea behind these warnings, you allow for new interpretations, exceptions, and also extremes. And while I believe that the medieval age was when gluttony first developed its insidious roots, I believe that the Industrial Revolution was where consumerism first reared its ugly head. I want to quickly make an aside here and highlight the differences between consumerism and greed, which we'll be covering later on in the series. Greed is an idea that is based in both a desire for power and fear of losing what you have, and a desire to be more powerful than those around you by having more than them. Consumerism, on the other hand, has its roots in our base desires, in our lizard brain. In the modern era, we are essentially monkeys clicking bright flashing buttons and getting dopamine hits from what we consume. And sometimes that's food, sometimes that's social media likes, sometimes that's clicking the buy it now button. But at the end of the day, consumerism is about using, whereas greed is about hoarding. I say that now because, of course, greed has existed since the dawn of man. Consumerism, on the other hand, is different. Consumerism as we know it now couldn't possibly have existed before the concept of mass production. During the Industrial Revolution, in some ways we gave up on the idea of thriftiness. We started looking down on it. Instead of seeing it as a virtue and something that we should pursue, we saw it mostly as a means to an end and something that, if you didn't absolutely have to do it, you really shouldn't. Mass production led to us creating, at a faster rate than any reasonable person could possibly use, for cheaper than any reasonable person would ever think twice about spending. And so it led to the idea that rather than, figuring out how to reuse items or reduce your waste or find ways to recycle, you could just throw things away, buy it, use it, get rid of it, do it all over again. And during the Industrial Revolution, that's when the owning class realized that this was a way for them to consistently, always have money coming in. If you make cheap products that are disposable, people will have to continue buying your products. And thus consumerism was born. Now, mass production, automation, the Industrial Revolution, Henry Ford, these all led to consumerism. And that's where its roots lay. But nowadays, it has taken on, as I said, a much more insidious form, because every single piece of media around you is actually geared towards consumerism. As you navigate around online, you will see that you are consistently bombarded with advertisements. Take a look at what advertisements you're seeing. You'll likely notice that a lot of these products seem familiar because these advertisements are all geared towards your own spending habits. These corporations have data on you based on your consumption, and so they know how to hit you where it hurts. They can find what you are already weak to and advertise that to you harder and harder to make you try and give in to this consumeristic ideology. Social media is another vector in which consumerism will try and get to you, because when you're on social media, you're constantly going to be shown people who have things that you want. An entire line of corporate diplomacy was born called brand ambassadors, people who are conventionally attractive and who use products and get paid to do so. They're simply there to show you that if only you bought this product, you could be as happy and attractive as I am. The age of the internet has truly brought about a new wave of consumerism. You're able to simply log on to any of your favorite websites, Amazon, Walmart, Target, and with a click of a button, order whatever your heart desires. You don't have to think twice about if it's truly a wise purchase, if you could possibly do without, if you might be able to reuse something that you already own to fill that same purpose. Why would you bother doing any of that when everything you could possibly want is simply a click away? A few short decades ago, it wasn't that simple. You couldn't hop into any store that you wanted 24/7. You would at least have to get in a car and go during normal business hours. But nowadays, with the advent of the internet, you can do it from the comfort of your own living room. You don't even need to get dressed. And companies are banking on that. There are numerous lawsuits out for planned obsolescence, which is the idea that companies are purposefully making their products worse so that they will break sooner, be obsolete sooner, and you'll have to buy a new one. And they don't care about the toll on the environment or the toll on your wallet. They just want you to buy more. Now, speaking of the toll on the environment and your wallet, as I said, Gluttony as a sin initially had very practical purposes. You needed to be able to tell your societal group not to be wasteful. And you couldn't just say, don't be wasteful because you shouldn't do it. That doesn't fit in with our lizard brain mentality of consuming and consuming just in case we don't have any more to consume later. They had to come up with a set of laws. Don't overconsume because God says it's wrong. Well, nowadays, there are practical reasons why consumerism is also bad. It's not just about your own finances, although, of course, that comes into it. But consumerism has a toll on every single aspect of our society. That's what makes it so insidious. The environmental impact alone of consumerism can be seen in many ways. There are periods of my life where I would have Amazon boxes showing up by the dozens to our door. And every single one of those boxes had to be driven by one of a fleet of trucks. The products inside had to be made using plastic disposable material that would never really degrade. And that's not to mention the fact that many of these cheap, fast fashion accessories are made using literal slave labor. So part of the reason that consumerism is so insidious is because of the horrible toll it takes. Of course, it takes a terrible toll on yourself personally. But let's first consider something even bigger. The environment, our home planet, the one thing that we cannot possibly afford to lose. Consumerism tears down forests. You need both land and material to create all of these disposable products. And so as we consume more and more and more, precious land is taken up by factories, woodlands are leveled by the acre, and toxic pollutants are poured into the atmosphere. Fleets of Amazon delivery trucks, hordes of cargo ships are constantly adding pollutants to the air we breathe, the water we drink. Microplastics are infecting our blood, our children's blood. All of this for the sake of corporations making an extra dollar. And speaking of which, it does have a personal cost to you as well. Of course, consumerism has a monetary cost, but it has more than that as well. The stress of always feeling like you need more and more to satisfy that hole in your heart. The stress of falling into debt just to keep up with your consumeristic addictions, perpetual sense of dissatisfaction because you're constantly told that you absolutely have to have this brand new shiny toy. All the while, consumerism is fueling economic and social inequality across the globe because that fast fashion that you absolutely had to have was made by child slaves. That new piece of electronic hardware was made by somebody making 10 cents a day. If consumerism is so bad, if it truly will lead to the downfall of our society, of our planet, then why do we continue down this path? Well, it's because these corporations need us to. Consumerism is their lifeblood. It's in their bones. They count on the fact that with enough advertising, with enough social pressure, with enough brand ambassadors telling you that you need to have the next new shiny thing to fill that void in your soul, they can get a constant stream of income from you. They'll make sure that you don't consider reusing things. You don't consider making do with less. You deserve it all. And it just so happens that that makes them filthy rich too. So what do we do about it? How do we get this horrible addiction of consumerism off our back? How do we continue in a world that seems hell-bent, literally, on embracing consumerism to the very end? Well, there's a few different ways. First of all, on a personal level, and what may be the hardest for some of us, is mindful consumption. Being conscious about every purchase that you make. Now, of course, there are levels to this, and so many of us don't have the time to go through every single brand that we purchase and make sure it's ethically sourced and that the corporation involved in manufacturing uses environmentally friendly practices. But don't let perfect be the enemy of good. do some research. I'm going to include a couple of links in the description below for some websites that I find helpful in doing research for my own consumption journey. Take some time to look at some of the most common brands that you buy and just see if there's an alternative that you could use instead. Something that is more ecologically friendly. Take the time to look at some of the most common brands that you buy and just see, are they ecologically friendly? Do they ethically source their labor? For example, in my own research, I have found that there are a number of brands that I either previously used or was considering using that I'm now avoiding. I absolutely refuse to get anything from Shein, from Temu, from Zara because of their fast fashion terrorism, because of the horrible ecological impacts that their brands offer, and because some of these brands use child labor. Nestle is a parent company of many, many brands. And this is where it kind of comes back to there are layers to everything, because Nestle owns hundreds and hundreds of product lines that you almost can't avoid. But for example, things like Deer Park water, Perrier, Gerber brand baby foods, Starbucks, Hot Pockets, Stouffer's. Nestle owns those brands, and so I try and make it a point to avoid using them because Nestle is known worldwide for their ecological terrorism, for the way that they absolutely abuse local state governments and essentially steal their water at horribly, horribly reduced prices, simply so that they can make $1. But just taking the small step to think about your purchases before you make them. Don't just click that buy now button, but really consciously decide, is this a brand that I want to support? Is this a product that I truly need? Will make a world of difference. Now, aside from just being an ethical consumer, another way that you can attempt to break free of the chains of consumerism is by changing the way that you act in your own life. Deciding that, for example, you're going to detox away from some of these avenues that advertise to you. For example, taking that old adage of reduce, reuse, and recycle to heart. Take a look at the things you buy and try to really think about, is all of this necessary? There is absolutely nothing wrong with buying things. There's nothing wrong with treating yourself, getting yourself things that are not just pure necessity. But consider if you can possibly take a step back and reduce even just a little, and then reuse. What can you use in a different way? Do you, for example, get Chinese takeout? Can you reuse those plastic containers? Can you repair your old damaged clothes if you get a tear in a shirt or lose a button? And finally, recycle. If there is a way for you to recycle in your community, I highly encourage you to take advantage of that. Finally, the last way that I would say we can attempt to fight back against this consumeristic culture is get organized. Talk to your community about systemic change. Are you supporting policies that are friendly for the environment? Are you supporting community initiatives that can help people who otherwise wouldn't have the means to help themselves? Are you able to, instead of simply throwing away your old garments or old toys, find a community center that you can donate them to? The most important thing in all of this is to simply be aware. Be conscious of the choices you're making. And if you have to make a choice that maybe you're not happy with, that's okay. Nobody is perfect. And this system is designed around making you make those uncomfortable, bad decisions. But just be aware. Open your eyes to the fact that consumerism drives a very large part of your existence. So From its origins in ensuring that people didn't eat more than they should or waste food, to its insidious modern day inception of tricking you into buying things that you absolutely do not need, and see what small changes you can make. Even if it's just deciding not to buy a brand, even if it's just deciding that maybe you can patch that tear in your shirt. I hope you have enjoyed this perspective on how consumerism is the modern day version of gluttony. I would love to hear from you below if you agree or disagree with what I've said, or if you have any strategies that you have adopted to try and fight against consumerism in your own life or your own community. Please share below. I would really love to hear from you. In the next episode of our Modern 7 Deadly Sins series, we're going to be taking a look at sloth and its modern day equivalent, and how it has insidiously taken hold of a surprising group of people. Thank you again for joining me for this week's episode. I look forward to talking to you soon.